It's crazy to think that around 15 years ago, Uber was just an insane idea that a couple of friends had in Paris. Fast forward to today, this billion-dollar company has a special place on all of our phones, ready to save us with those lazy or emergency trips that we can book with a couple of taps. But how did Uber get here? That's what we'll dive into in this video, the rise of Uber. It all started in 2008, when Garrett Camp, who co-founded StumbleUpon, and his friend Travis Kalanick were in Paris. They were having a hard time getting a cab and thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could just push a button and get a ride? That simple idea led to the creation of Uber. In 2009, they launched UberCab in San Francisco. At first, it was all about luxury black cars, but the concept was straightforward. Use an app to find a ride. No more waving down taxis or standing in the rain hoping one would stop. UberCab caught on quickly. By late 2010, they dropped the cab from the name and started expanding. In 2011, they hit New York City, and things really started to take off. People loved how easy it was to use an app to get a ride, and word spread fast. The real game changer came in 2013 when Uber introduced UberX. This allowed regular people to use their own cars to offer rides. Suddenly, Uber wasn't just a luxury service, it was something everyone could afford. This move massively increased the number of drivers and made it easier for anyone to get a ride. But Uber didn't stop there. They kept improving their app with cool features like real-time GPS tracking, so you could see your car coming, fare estimates, so you knew what you'd pay, and cashless payments for convenience. These innovations set Uber apart from traditional taxis and made it a hit with users. As Uber grew, it started expanding internationally. By 2012, it was in cities like London and Paris, and soon it was all over the globe. Each new city had its own challenges, but the core idea remained the same. Make getting a ride as easy as pushing a button, the disruption of traditional taxi services. Now let's talk about how Uber shook up the traditional taxi industry. Before Uber came along, getting a taxi meant standing on the street trying to flag one down, or calling a taxi company and hoping they'd show up on time. It was hit or miss, and not exactly convenient. When Uber entered the scene, it completely changed the game. Suddenly, you could order a ride from anywhere using your phone. No more waving your arms or waiting on hold. You could see where your driver was in real time and get an estimate of how much your ride would cost. This level of convenience was a huge deal. Uber's pricing was another major disruptor. Traditional taxis had set rates and sometimes added extra fees. Uber introduced dynamic pricing, which could be cheaper than taxis most of the time, but would go up during peak times. We all know about surge pricing. This flexible pricing model appealed to a lot of people, even if surge pricing sometimes annoyed them. Uber also changed the way we think about safety and accountability. Traditional taxis didn't always have a way to track your ride or rate your driver. With Uber, every ride is tracked via GPS, and both riders and drivers rate each other. This system created a new level of accountability and trust that traditional taxis didn't offer. In short, Uber brought a level of convenience, flexibility, and accountability that disrupted the traditional taxi industry in a big way. It wasn't just about getting a ride anymore. It was about a whole new way of thinking about transportation. But it wasn't all roses for the taxi drivers themselves. For many traditional taxi drivers, Uber was a game changer, and not always in a good way. Suddenly, they were up against a whole new set of drivers who didn't need special licenses or expensive taxi medallions. This new competition hit hard. Taxi drivers who had spent a lot on their medallions saw their value drop massively. In some cities, these medallions were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but with Uber in the picture, their value plummeted. It was a tough financial blow for many taxi drivers. But there was a flip side. Some taxi drivers switched to driving for Uber and found it offered more flexibility. Instead of being tied to long shifts with a taxi company, they could set their own hours and work when they wanted. For many of them, this meant a better work-life balance. Uber also made it easy for people to drive part-time. People who couldn't commit to full-time driving could make some extra money driving for Uber on weekends or evenings. This was something traditional taxi driving didn't really offer. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some drivers found that after paying for gas and car maintenance, their earnings weren't as high as they hoped. And since Uber drivers are considered independent contractors, they didn't get benefits like health insurance or paid time off, adding another layer of uncertainty. So, Uber had a mixed impact on taxi drivers. It brought new challenges and competition, but also offered more flexibility and part-time opportunities. The law. All right, let's talk about the regulatory challenges and legal battles Uber faced. When Uber started expanding, it wasn't long before it ran into some serious pushback. Traditional taxi companies and local governments were not thrilled about this new competitor that didn't follow the same rules. In many cities, taxi companies have to follow strict regulations, from licensing to insurance requirements. Uber, on the other hand, was operating in a grey area. It argued that it wasn't a taxi service, but a technology platform connecting drivers and riders. This didn't sit well with everyone. Cities like New York, London, and Paris saw protests from taxi drivers who felt Uber was playing by a different set of rules. In some places, these protests got pretty intense, with drivers blocking streets and demanding action from their governments. Local governments started taking notice. Many cities and countries tried to regulate or even ban Uber. In some places, Uber had to fight legal battles just to keep operating. For instance, in London, Uber's license was revoked in 2017 over safety concerns, but after a lengthy court battle, it was reinstated. Uber's response to these challenges was aggressive. They didn't back down easily and often took their fights to court. They also spent a lot of money lobbying for regulations that would allow them to operate more freely. This approach worked in some places, but not in others. One of the biggest issues was how Uber classified its drivers. By calling them independent contractors instead of employees, Uber avoided having to provide benefits like health insurance and paid leave. This led to legal battles in several countries, with drivers demanding more rights and better treatment. In some places, like California, laws were introduced to reclassify gig workers as employees, which put more pressure on Uber. Despite these challenges, Uber kept expanding and adapting to different regulatory environments. They made changes to their policies, improved safety measures, and worked with local governments to find common ground. So, there you have it. Uber's journey from a small startup to a global giant completely changed the taxi industry. They made getting a ride as easy as pushing a button on your phone, offering convenience and flexibility that traditional taxis couldn't match. In the end, Uber set new standards for the entire industry, making rides quicker, easier, and more transparent. What do you think of Uber? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.